going to call the meeting to order. Good evening. My name is John Samia, and I'm the chairman of the Shrewsbury Board of Selectmen. On behalf of my fellow board members and the town manager's office, I want to welcome you to our November 23rd, 2021 Board of Selectmen meeting. In addition, I also want to wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving. Tonight's live broadcast is being brought to you by Mark Serra of the Shrewsbury Media Connection. In addition to tonight's live broadcast on channels 30 and 330 and Facebook, tonight's meeting will be rebroadcast on the same channels from tomorrow until our next scheduled meeting on December 7th, 2021. At our December 7th meeting, it will include a presentation regarding the proposal of the proposed mixed-use project for the reuse of the Beale property and a public hearing to provide residents with an opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed project. Now we'll go to preliminaries. First item on the agenda is to approve bills, payrolls, and warrants.
Move approval.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is to approve minutes of November 2nd, 2021 and November 9th, 2021.
Move approval.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, announcements or reports, colleagues? Anything? I just have one announcement. So on October 19th, 2021, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force presented a summary of its report and recommendations. Minutes that we just approved for our November 2nd workshop. Part of that workshop was dedicated to a fulsome discussion of our fiscal year 2022 Board of Selectmen goals, and it also included a discussion about the DEI's report and recommendations. At that time, members of the Board of Selectmen were tasked with various action items, which we continue to make progress on. I would recommend that we have an agenda item at our December 14th regularly scheduled meeting to discuss potential next steps, and some are all the following items. For example, potential establishment of a permanent DEI committee, which recommendations will be implemented, timeline for implementation, retention of a subject matter expert or a consultant, one particularly with experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, and ideally implementation of recommendations, any scope of such retention, and the interplay between any implemented recommendations, diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, and the strategic plan. So these are all types of questions that we can talk about on the 14th. I think there are a lot of questions there, but some of those questions we can at least tackle during that meeting. So we'll put that as a formal agenda item on the 14th of December, and that's the only item that I have. Mr. DiPaolo.
I forgot to mention just quickly, police station foundations are all in. The masonry's going up. There's a little bit of steel associated with the masonry. The steel, the major steel shipment and next step is going to come in on the 6th of December. And they'll be erecting that immediately upon that, and then they'll continue along with the laying the block, and they'll be doing that through the winter. So it's moving along nicely. It'll probably be closed in sometime in January, but it's moving very well. There's been no, except for rain, there's been no major delays.
It's great. Thank you. Any other items?
Mr. Chairman, I would
Yes.
just, two things. Number one, agree with your recommendation that we address the DEI recommendations at the December 14th meeting, and also thank the town manager's office for the video that they established and sent out regarding the public hearing on the 7th regarding the Beale reuse.
That's very well done. Good point. Thank you. Anything else? Not, we'll go next. We'll take three items together. I believe your slide deck has all three: the town manager's report, COVID-19 update, and then under financial business, review and revise financial policies. Mr. Mizikar.
Good evening, board members. I'll start with the COVID-19 update. We're up to 3,744 positive cases, which is an increase of 114 since last reported on November 9th. 61 additional cases in the last 7 days. Unfortunately, for the last few meeting cycles, we've seen a downward trend, but now we're headed back up again. And that turn really happened within the last 10 days, where we started to see annual caseloads back up around 10 per day. So this is a definite marked change in an increase, which you'll see on the coming slides. We still continue to report cases out every Friday, and unfortunately have to report one additional COVID-19 indicated death since your last meeting, bringing the town total to 77. As you see on the far right side of the screen there, as I mentioned, the increase in case counts over the past 10 to 12 days is marked and noticeable. Number of factors at play with regards to testing and potentially a reduction in efficacy of the original COVID vaccines. Individuals now over the age of 18 are eligible for a booster. So we encourage you to consult with your doctor and consider getting that, as we are seeing an increase in cases. Vaccination data. This does not include any booster shot information. This is all just the first round of vaccines for individuals. Pleased to see continued increases, especially that marked increase in first doses, which obviously a significant contribution to that is the time frame since your last meeting that individuals 5 years of age and up are now eligible. So happy to see a strong number, almost 1,200 additional individuals got their first vaccine. We remain at roughly 72% fully vaccinated, 307 additional individuals since your last meeting. Here's the statistics that we share with regards to cases and vaccination data. And we still note that the 20 to 29-year-olds are the lowest group being vaccinated. And our cases are spread out over almost every age group here. So no group is getting a pass. Encourage everyone to get vaccinated. So moving beyond the COVID numbers, I just wanted to provide the board with an update of the CARES Act. So the CARES Act was the initial round of funding that came in from the federal government to support the town's response to the pandemic. Those funds were made available to us in late May of 2020. And the town was originally allocated $3,347,993. The term of use period for performance for these funds ended on October 31st, 2021. And any funds remaining were turned back over to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who has until the end of the calendar year to expend those funds. Through the end of that final reporting period, we spent $2,589,309.92, leaving a balance of $758,687.08. The largest contributing factor to the reason that we didn't spend all the dollars available to us was kind of a change as we went through the reporting processes when the presidential administration changed, and FEMA funding became much more available to us starting in January of 2021. With that change in federal policy, state policy required us to first run our request through FEMA and receive funding versus sending it directly through CARES. So with regards to FEMA funding, we have been reimbursed $88,677.63 to date, and we have additional pending applications of $821,300.35. So you can see in total that we have accessed, and the way the FEMA applications work, since we have submitted 4 rounds, we're very confident that we'll receive all $821,000 remaining from that bucket of funding, and that continues to remain open to us today for any expenses that we have. Between those 2 buckets of CARES Act and FEMA, we're anticipating total spend of just shy of $3.5 million in our response to the pandemic. This doesn't include any of the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we'll talk about a little bit later. Just wanted to give the board an update since we're now closed out of CARES, and kind of the snapshot of our direct response to the pandemic, thus far being about $3.5 million.
Any questions?
I have one, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Mrs. Cassavant.
So is the other piece of the difference in what we spent on CARES Act, through CARES Act, and what was left, the strict requirement to be able to document everything and not having expenses that we could document in order to take full advantage of the CARES Act funding?
Right, yeah, I mean, I'm fully confident that we didn't use any local dollars where CARES Act funds could have been used, but there were, strict limitations, and scrutiny really ratcheted up over time as we moved further into the summer of 2021, and we all thought at the time maybe everything was going away. The state scrutiny they were really questioning a lot of funds, like, why is it so urgent now, 14 months after the pandemic started, why are you making this purchase now versus, some that should have been made in April if it was really a need of the prior year. So we did get a lot of scrutiny eventually, and, we had to fall within all the various funding brackets that were provided to us. But like I said, I'm confident that we didn't spend any local dollars where federal dollars could have been spent.
Just as a follow-up.
Sure, go
So
ahead.
if we did try to put something through that wasn't approved, that would then have come out of local dollars. So it was prudent to be extremely cautious in what we asked for reimbursement for.
Completely, yep.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question as well. So in terms of the strict scrutiny to get it approved, is there also an audit right after the fact? Do we have any audit period that they can come back and look at our records, or is it done up front?
These funds will be included in our standard single audit. That'll be the audit approach of the federal government. So that's done by our traditional auditor when he does the rest of our books, so this will be incorporated. And then any concerns is subject to further scrutiny by the federal government.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to continue on.
Okay. So that will move us into a brief conversation about the financial policies. As we've discussed over the previous 3 years that we've been using this approach to financial policies, we set the financial policies up to be very stable, and our guardrails or guiding lights towards our overall financial approach. And therefore, they've remained very stable, and they include requirements for our generation of free cash, our savings through our various stabilization accounts, and our debt management and investment policies. So we're not proposing any changes to any of the existing policies this year. However, given the work that the Board of Selectmen did throughout the spring, in concert with the school committee, as we worked through the override process and the financial model that we put in place for that, we are recommending the establishment of an override stabilization policy. So the policy manual for the board will have a background providing an overview of why the override stabilization policy was created, which was, of course, to prolong and provide financial stability using the funds that we've received from the Proposition 2.5 override. And the override stabilization policy hopefully remains a very durable policy and needs little change in the future. So in order to do that, we're proposing a policy that says the town shall fund the override stabilization fund with tax levy dollars in accordance with the requirements of specific commitments of a Proposition 2.5 override. And those commitments come through the Board of Selectmen's agreement with the school committee and the joint commitment to the members of the community by those two elected bodies. Further, these funds will be drawn upon by town meeting and appropriated into the operating budget to preserve service levels and prolong the duration between Proposition 2.5 override questions. So again, no changes to any of the existing policies that we've had in place, but we are proposing the establishment of this new override stabilization policy.
Any questions or comments? Action, be board approval? So if we get a motion to approve the revised financial policies in front of us.
So moved.
I'm sorry,
I
second.
got it.
Moving second, and all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I do have a question was forming to the manager. In the previous form, when we called this a fiscal policy document, we had a notation in there about OPEB. I don't believe, do we have that in here anymore, or how are we addressing?
So OPEB over the past 3 years has been handling the financial objectives, which will be, I believe, on the 14th agenda.
Okay.
Which are more specific to each budget process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? If not, we'll go to the next item on the agenda under meetings. We have a time-scheduled meeting with the school department. This is our third departmental update. We've started this in September with police and fire, and now we have the school department. With us this evening are presenting Dr. Joseph Sawyer, superintendent, and Mr. Patrick Collins, assistant superintendent for finance and operations, as well as Mr. John Wensky, who is the chair of the school committee, and all members of the school committee are also present. If you wouldn't mind introducing all members of the school committee as well.
Certainly. Good evening, and thank you for having us tonight. As you said, I am joined by my school committee colleagues, Vice Chair Sandy Fritz, Secretary Lindsay Heffernan, and members Dr. Dale McGee and Jason Pouch. And we're excited to provide you with an update from the Shrewsbury Public Schools today. It's been 7 months since we had our last joint meeting, and at that time I know we were talking about the override framework and the commitment to the residents of Shrewsbury should they pass it successfully on May 4th, and answered the call, and we truly appreciate their support. The early successes that we've had at the start of the school year is a direct result of the community's commitment to public education and to the dedication of our district leadership, educators, and families. The opening of the new Beale School, as you know, has been a game changer for us. It is delivering 100% tuition-free full-day kindergarten to all families, in addition to reducing the enrollment at each of our 5 elementary schools. Just kind of a sample of the early successes that we've had. But as you know, it's been a whirlwind for public education over the last 20 months. In addition to the successes, there's a new set of challenges that we're certainly experiencing as we adapt to the new post-pandemic normal for public education. So tonight, Dr. Sawyer, Mr. Collins will provide you with a kind of a high-level overview of the public schools in Shrewsbury and a high-level view of the financials as well, as we enter a very different budget system for the school department. So with that, I hand it over to Dr. Sawyer and Mr. Collins.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wensky, and it's our pleasure and privilege to be here this evening to address the Board of Selectmen, and appreciate those who are watching at home who may not always tune into school department broadcasts. So I want to start with an overview of who we are as a school district and organization. We always like to start with, well, give you actually a little preview what we'll be talking about. We'll talk about our mission and core values and our vision, our strategic planning, the approach we're taking to this current year, some highlights and some challenges. We'll talk about one key item around space and enrollment and student demographics, a financial overview, and then Mr. Wensky will give some closing remarks. Our mission has been around now for over 25 years. I think it was established a year or two before I came here in 1997, and it served us well over that period of time, and essentially indicates that our responsibility is to partner with the community in order to provide students with what they need to be successful. This language is starting to get a little bit dated now that we're a fifth of the way through the 21st century. Back in 1995 or so, it seemed a far way off. But what they need for success in their future, an appreciation of our democratic tradition, which is something that I think has taken on more importance in recent times, and the desire to continue to learn throughout life. Our core values in terms of how we want to behave, what we aspire to as we carry out that mission, are respect and responsibility, collaboration and communication, commitment to high standards and expectations, and equity. These were adopted, I want to say, about 20 years ago, and again have served us well. There's some additional detail under each of those, but those are the broad categories that we hold ourselves to as aspirations. Our vision was established just a few years back, in 2018, 17 and 18. There was a group of about 30 some odd members. About half were educators from the school district. About half were parents from the school district who represented a variety of jobs and professions. Dr. McGee represented the school committee, where they underwent a long-term, essentially, study group to look at, if this is our mission and core values, what is our vision for our students by the time they graduate from Shrewsbury High School? And this Portrait of a Graduate project, which was starting sort of nationally at the time. We were one of the first districts in this area to adopt this approach. Came up with these 6 broad categories that we want for our students that you can see in this graphic. And some of them, particularly important, we want to make sure we're teaching our kids how to think, not what to think. So critical thinking is crucial, but it's not an and or. We also want them to master important content so they have a baseline, deep understanding of important topics. Innovation in the sense that we want to teach them how to think creatively, solve problems creatively. We know that as the things continue with artificial intelligence and other things that we're seeing even now, one can only imagine what that might look like a decade or 2 decades from now, that it's the human element, jobs that are plug and play that can be done by AI or that can be done through a spreadsheet, are not going to be particularly valuable. So how do you bring a human problem-solving element to things in an innovative way? Resilience and focus probably couldn't have been more important over the past couple of years and what we're experiencing now. How do we teach our students to bounce back when they face challenges? How in a world when everyone has a distraction machine in their pocket, help them to focus for sustained periods of time is an important thing that we need to try to provide as a school district. Collaboration and communication is straight from our core values, but this is about how do we teach our kids to be effective team members, which we know is what employers want. How is it that we teach them to be effective communicators? Another skill that when any year you're looking at what employers are looking for in candidates, it's no matter how much you know or what your skills are, if you can't communicate it to others, that you can't provide the value they want. Global citizenship and engagement, certainly starting locally in the state and nationally, but also in a global perspective. And of course, we've become a much more diverse and international community over the last couple of decades. And we know that our students will be interacting, whether that's in person or through Zoom, with people all over the world. When we did 2 strategic plans ago, I remember that we had a group of business leaders come and present to the school committee. I believe Mr. Samuel was there at the time, and they were talking then about the kind of real-time and asynchronous collaboration they were doing with customers and colleagues all over the world, and that's only been increased exponentially, certainly as a result of the technology and what's been happening in recent years. And then finally, leadership, which is I think a bit of a controversial topic at the time with the study group, because there was a question of, well, is it fair to put that kind of pressure that every student has to be a leader? But ultimately, the group decided that their definition of leadership was essentially anything you do to influence someone else's success is a type of leadership. It's not a position. You don't have to be the captain of the team or the president of the class. And all of us have the opportunity to build skills to be able to influence other people in a positive direction. So that's the vision we created for what, or, in a broad sense, we want our graduates to be able to provide and be able to do, and some of the characteristics they have by the time they leave us and graduate from Shrewsbury High School. At the same time, we were developing a new 5-year strategic plan, and the school committee adopted these 4 strategic priorities. We are partway through, we're getting towards the end of this 2018-2022 phase. As you might imagine, this was affected a great deal by the pandemic in some ways. In other ways, the fact that we were preparing and doing some work actually helped us respond well to the pandemic. In terms of the learning environments where everyone's success matters, and these are not in any particular order, that really was about providing more inclusive opportunities for students, making sure all students had opportunities to excel and become the best person and student they could be. The enhanced well-being of all, focusing on social and emotional learning, focusing on ways we can support our members of our school community, especially our students, in making sure that they have socially, emotionally, behaviorally, mental health-wise are well supported. And that has definitely come into play, and I'll refer to that later in terms of the impact of the pandemic. Connected learning for a complex world was essentially looking at, with the kind of technology that our students have access to now and certainly will have access to in their future, how is it that we can make sure that they're finding ways to learn in ways that they know how to connect with others effectively and collaborate and all those things that are important, as well as finding ways to have hands-on and real-world learning experiences. And one of the things we're excited about now that we're moving in out of the pandemic phase, hopefully, is that to restart some work we had begun prior to the shutdown around providing some more internship opportunities for students. Dr. Lazat, in her role as Assistant Superintendent for Community Partnerships and Wellbeing, has been doing some excellent work with a group of local business people and some folks from the high school to start to find ways to get our high school students more opportunities, whether that's during the school year, summers, after school, to be out connecting with local employers. That's some work we're very excited to move forward. And then finally, this last one is one I think we hit out of the park, which is space and resources for effective learning. Goal number one was to get a new elementary school passed and built, and that's been extraordinarily successful. Goal number two was to have sufficient budgetary resources to maintain what we have and not be in this boom and bust cycle where we were constantly looking at potential cuts to programming and personnel. And as a result of the override and the groundbreaking agreement between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee, we are in a much better place, and we'll certainly speak to that in the report. Again, the plan is for 2018 and 2022. We had to make some adjustments because of the pandemic, and we do plan to start embarking on a new planning cycle next fall. As far as this year, our primary goal is really to make sure we're providing full-time in-school learning for our students with minimal disruptions and using a variety of mitigation strategies to minimize the risk of contracting COVID-19. That's the overarching goal that I think all schools have this year. In terms of our approach, we are implementing mitigation strategies to reduce the risk of transmission, but we're also making sure we're working to create a sense of belonging and support for students, especially around their social, emotional, and mental health, because they have been affected by the pandemic for many students. And then, of course, to provide learning opportunities that support students' academic needs. And those are varied and different as a result of what they've experienced, the disruption they've experienced over the past few years. In terms of COVID-19 itself, this is a screenshot of the current data dashboard we have on our website. There's a prominent link on our homepage that anyone can click on. We update that at the beginning of every week. We count the weeks Saturday through Friday. It actually aligns with the report that comes out from the town every Friday as well, so we can make comparisons there. And you can see last week we had 21 cases. That was up from 2 weeks in a row where I believe we had about 13. Cumulative total as of last Friday was 175. We've had a handful more cases so far this week as well. In terms of those cases, there were 139 of them that required contact tracing because the individual was in school during their infectious period once they discovered they had COVID. And then we have two categories, one that's called possible in-school transmission, where it's possible that because of close contact with another positive case in the district, they may have contracted it at school, but there was also some sort of contact outside of school, and it's impossible to determine which one may have been the case that transmitted to them. Then there are probable where the close contact is in school, but there's no outside of school contact that anyone's aware of, and so that is more of a probable. And you can see that we had 11, as of Friday, 11 possible cases and 21 probable cases of transmission. Want to take you through a few highlights of this year, where we're at so far. Pretty simple, but really important. All of our students are attending full-time in-person school, which is a huge improvement over the past year and a half. There's definitely been a huge positive of the more return to more normal student kinds of learning opportunities, whether that's classroom. We're not spaced apart in desks all in rows. We're doing the more typical hands-on group learning that is a hallmark of the approach that we've used for years. We have academic teams like robotics and speech and debate meeting and working together. different clubs, the performing arts, the return of the fall play this year was a great benchmark for us. With music concerts that happened this fall, we'll have some more coming in early December. And then a full athletic season that was very successful at both Oak and the high school. And then, of course, I won't belabor the opening of the new Beal School, which I know Mr. Collins will speak to a bit as well, was a huge highlight. We just reported recently on excellent results for the class of 2021 in terms of their post-high school opportunities. The vast majority of students from Shrewsbury go on to college, most of them four-year colleges, some 2 years. A little higher percentage than typical who are taking a gap year because of the uncertainty, I think, that people were concerned about what college might look like with the ongoing pandemic. And then we always have a small number who choose to go into the military or directly into the workplace. But the range of, we're always emphasizing what's the best fit and what's the best match. And if you look at the report that's on our website, you'll see that, and I actually sent out a link to this in an email today to the community, just a range of colleges. And so we feel very good that our school district is able to set up our students for success in that, depending on what their level of academic achievement is, they have access to schools that they're interested in, regardless of how selective those schools might be. We have a number, especially because of the override and because of opening Beal, hired more new staff than a typical year. And overall, they're excelling. We have a great group of new staff who are doing excellent work, and also some staff who are either hired as new leaders or promoted from within into leadership positions who are doing outstanding work. Another piece I think it's important to note is that some of the adaptations we had to go through during the pandemic are making a difference in terms of what we're bringing to the table as far as student learning now. And one example of that is that when we started our strategic plan and talked about connected learning, we were thinking about, maybe we're going to move from sharing an iPad in fourth grade and third grade classes, one among two kids, to maybe we'd have, one-to-one iPads in third and fourth grade. Little did we think when we created that goal that we would be full one-to-one, 24/7 iPads take home from kindergarten all the way through. We had to do that because that was the nature of what we needed to accomplish, and it's worked out extremely well. Our staff's worked really hard to adapt. That's just one of many ways they've had to work hard to adapt. We have increased our inclusive practices. I'm happy to announce that just recently, Special Olympics of Massachusetts named Parker Road Preschool a unified champion school. That's due to the work that they've done to create inclusive sports and playtime activities for students, inclusive book readings, as well as a whole school inclusion day they had last year. They joined Shrewsbury High School, Oak Middle School, and Sherwood Middle School as unified champion schools. And I know that the team is working hard to get the elementary schools next. Our goal is to have all 9 of our schools be unified champion schools sometime in the near future. We just had a report at the last school committee meeting on a new community-based program that we are looking to launch next year to meet the needs of our special education students whom we serve until they turn age 22. And there's been a move in the field to try to create more community-based opportunities for those students. We have a great partner and exemplar next door in Westboro. Some of you might be familiar with the Borough Sugar Shack, which is right in downtown Westboro, which is actually run by, it's a business that's put up essentially by the school district, and is the employees there are the students in their program, their 18 to 22-year-old program, and those students get different kinds of life skills lessons as well as employment lessons as being part of that business, and we're looking to replicate a similar program here in Shrewsbury. So that's exciting work that Ms. Balsito and Mr. Collins and their teams are working on. And then we've had continued success with philanthropic development. I want to thank Wind Waste Innovation, formerly known as Wheeler Brader, for their recent gift of $70,000 to the Colonial Fund, as well as a recent $40,000 gift to provide some different opportunities through Shrewsbury Federal Credit Union. Dr. Lizotte, in her role, and continues to work with Kathleen Cohane and Michelle Biscotti, our co-coordinators of development and volunteer activities, to continue to find ways to bring in resources to do innovative work that may not be supported by the regular budget. So we continue to do that. We also face a whole variety of challenges, and it's important to note some of the difficulties that we're experiencing. there have been a variety of disruptions to student learning as a result of the pandemic. It would have been naive to think that students could go through that experience of being at home pretty much full-time in the spring of 2020 in a hybrid model, or still staying home remote depending on what their families chose last year, getting back to some more in-person learning last spring, but it's still very different than typical school. And as a result, a variety of kids are behind in different ways academically, and we're still trying to figure out how we can best determine where that is, because it's a lot that's happened. We're finding that some students are having difficulties reacclimating to the school environment after having been through that experience. And some of what we're seeing is that there's sort of a delayed maturation in a lot of students, behaviors that we typically wouldn't see in early high school to be more sort of upper middle school we're seeing in the freshman and sophomore classes. Similarly, lower middle school students might be presenting more like an upper elementary student might present. And so these are just realities that we have to figure out and cope with, and figure out ways to support students as we build back to where they need to be. We definitely have had significant issues with student social, emotional, and behavioral and mental health concerns, more so than pre-pandemic. This is not unique to Shrewsbury, of course. You can see this happening all over the state and in the nation. And we are trying to use some of our resources that Mr. Collins will speak to bring on some additional supports to provide, whether that's additional counseling support, additional tutoring support for academics to respond to some of these challenges. We certainly knew already, and we had set some goals for our diversity and belonging, inclusion, and equity. I know you spoke to the report you received earlier. We had made a report recently about the goals we have as a school district this year to improve in that area. Unfortunately, we had a very unfortunate and concerning incident, or two incidents at Shrewsbury High School recently, around hateful language related to race and students' national origin. That just reminds us that we need to continue to focus those efforts because we are not immune to these issues, obviously, in our community. One thing of note that we are just coming to terms with, I just had a meeting the other day with the superintendent of Aspet Regional Vocational Technical High School, but they've just revised their policy. There is a state policy change, and the state policy indicates that vocational technical high schools need to change their admission practices so that essentially they cannot be selective in who they admit. And there's sort of a minimum standard that a student's progressing to the next grade, and they don't have any really significant behavior disciplinary history over the past year. And it also says explicitly that they must give preference and enroll students from their member communities prior to enrolling students from outside communities. Now, there's about 120, 130 communities in the state, and Shrewsbury is one of them, that does not belong to a regional technical high school district. We do not belong to the Assabet Valley Technical High School School District. We tuition our students in the long-standing partnership we've had with that district. And so given the demand that they expect for the 300 seats that they will fill next year in their freshman class, which they'll have to do essentially through a lottery, they expect that it'll be unlikely that there'll be any seats left over for other communities like ourselves, Clinton, I know Leicester, some other local communities send students there on a tuition basis. So it is quite possible that 0 current 8th graders in Shrewsbury will be admitted to Assabet. And frankly, it's probably the exact same story at any other vocational technical high school that they might want to apply to. So that's going to create some policy questions for us in terms of what we might do. It will mean some increased enrollment likely at Shrewsbury High School next year. Students who wanted that type of programming, which we certainly can't provide to that level. We had provided some other kinds of hands-on programming like our Project Lead the Way engineering course, but this is something that is going to have significant implications. We will see if this, I think this is an unintended consequence of the state policy, frankly. We'll have to see how that plays out. And then, of course, last year, as I mentioned before, the data we have is showing that we have some learning loss. Like pretty much any other organization, we're having staffing challenges and finding people to fill positions, particularly substitute teacher positions. And so coverage internally has been a challenge because we also are having more absences because, of course, we're more strict about staying home if you have certain symptoms. Someone has children who have symptoms, they have to keep them home. So that's something we've been looking at, and it's been a challenge for most school districts. And then, finally, around challenges, we've had feedback from our staff that this year has been extremely challenging. I think more so than people anticipated, myself included. And when that happens, obviously, we need to have concerns about potential burnout, morale issues. These are things that we're looking to address. We did a staff survey about a month ago, and we're trying to take some different steps to provide some supports and time and opportunity for them to do their work in ways that is not as stressful as what they're experiencing. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Collins, who will talk a bit about space and enrollment and finances before we wrap up the report with Mr. Wensky.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. So, as mentioned earlier, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the Beal School was certainly a project from beginning to the middle to the end, a great success. Do you want to talk about this picture on the left here, that young man?
Sure. Well, these are a couple of first graders. That's the very first day Beal was open. These gentlemen were waiting to get escorted down to their first grade class. And I asked the students what they thought of this, new Beal School and this beautiful mural in the lobby. And the young man on the left indicated that he looked around and said, this looks like a place where we can all be heroes, which I thought was a pretty neat, that's kind of what we were going for, right? So, it's turned out that way. And certainly Mr. Girardi and Ms. Hoy, the principal and assistant principal, and the staff there, not only are making great use of this incredible physical learning structure, but also are building a really wonderful school community as well.
Thank you. In terms of some other just anecdotal pieces on our space and enrollment on the next slide, you can see that we're with the redistricting by design and by plan. We are in very good shape with our class sizes, especially at the pre-K and level. The redistricting basically brought down the school sizes and enrollment at the other elementary schools, and we're able to repurpose some classroom spaces there for other purposes like music, art, and special education. Again, all part of this opening of the Beal project. The other factor that was really not anticipated was that we have seen a dip in enrollment since the pandemic onset, especially at the lower grades, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We still continue to experience enrollment pressure a bit at the middle school level, and certainly at the high school, where we have over 1,800 students still in a school that was designed for 1,475. And right before this meeting in this room, the Beal Building Committee did approve to move ahead with an updated pre-K through 12 capital inventory project with Lamoureux Pagano Associates. The last time that was done was in October of 1997. And the best way to describe that report back then was what they devised, of course, with our input locally, was effectively a playbook for capital construction, capital school construction for the next couple of decades. And we've really fulfilled that playbook. We've used all the plays in that playbook and been very successful. And so we need to have a new playbook, if you will. And we know that being planful is the best approach and cost-effective approach. So we're looking forward to engaging that process with them over the, say, next 7 to 9 months, and looking forward to what capital needs that we're going to have in context of our enrollment projections. So enrollment projections will be a part of that report as well, and matching that with the spaces that we have. So we have that work to look forward to. In terms of some specific information related to enrollment, this is a multi-year pre-K through 12 enrollment trend. Back to 2012, you can see we're just over 6,000 students. We peaked in 2017 at 6218, or actually 2019 at 6251. And then in 2020, of course, pandemic, we dropped 277 students. And then this year, we dropped another 89 students. And so we're COVID +1, and we still drop students. And especially during the pandemic, we saw the biggest decreases in enrollment in the preschool, kindergarten, and grade 1 levels. Also this year, our grade 1 was not as high as expected. And this, I think it's the next slide. If you fast forward here, you can see our grade 1 enrollment numbers this year, 339. Typically, what you would see is what we have seen, of course, if you look at grades 2, 3, and 4, you see in the low to mid 400s for the elementary grades. So this grade 1 is certainly an anomaly in terms of what's happened. And you can see preschool at 164. We would typically be running about 220 students there. So you can see how the elementary grades play out, and then, in terms of this span right now, the peak enrollment grades 5 through 8, and then typically we do have a little bit of a drop-off in grade 9 as students opt for private schools or vocational education. Now that we know we're going to have limited seats, that's not going to be so much an option. And we get the mid 400s, mid to upper 400s for our high school grades. In terms of our strategic planning and goals of the school committee, of course, was to, as part and parcel of the Beal School project, to provide full-day kindergarten to 100% of our students. That was achieved actually during the pandemic. As a result of the pandemic and having the hybrid model, we were actually able to have 100% of the students have a full-day kindergarten experience. But with the opening of Beal School this year, we're at 100%, of course, of students in the full-day kindergarten program, no longer in that small minority of communities that did not have that option for their students. And again, it's tuition-free as part of the school committee strategic plan, so can kind of check that block as well. Moving on to some student demographics. All of this information is as of October 1st, which is kind of the milestone reporting period for all school districts in the Commonwealth. And this information in these categories are right off the Department of Education website. These are the categories that they use to categorize student demographics. So we know that our student body's been growing in ethnic diversity over the years. We know that, we see that, and these figures here certainly show that in a very discrete fashion. And you can see, African American population is at 3.4%. Over a third of our students are Asian, just under 10% Hispanic, and our white population student is just over 48% at this particular point, and multi-race students is just about under 5%. And then you can see that in comparison to the state. The other piece that we put together in terms of student demographics is these categories here, again, from the Department of Education, and of our student body, almost, over 5,800 students, almost 37% of them, their first language is not English. We have 2.7% English language learner population. Those are students that are struggling to communicate in English, 18% low income, and 14.6% of students with disabilities. You can see that, again, in comparison to the state is running just about 19%. So we are below state average in comparison with students with disabilities. And then this category called high needs, this is basically a way to categorize kids that are either English language learners, low income, or students with disabilities. And if they fall into more than one category, they only get counted once. So we have just under a third of our students are considered high needs. And the reason that the Department of Education does these categorizations is, of course, research studies show that these populations require more financial resources and more targeted interventions in order to provide education and make them successful learners. And so that is the reason for having these statistics published, so that we can focus on these populations and make sure that every student is successful, as was mentioned earlier as part of our strategic priorities. Moving on to some of the financial information. Of course, we, like all other school districts across the nation and across the Commonwealth, have received significant federal funds to help manage through the pandemic. And those funds have been essential in dealing with all sorts of operational issues with respect to having to put furniture in storage, procure warehouse facility, purchase new furniture, purchase personal protective equipment, additional nursing support, and what have you. And, you know, we've been very planful, and in terms of the use of these funds, I'm going to show you some more specifics on the next slide. And we're also, many of these funds have multi-year runouts. So it's not as if we have to spend all the funds, you know, by the end of this fiscal year or any upcoming near-term piece for all of the funds. They each have individual dates. So we've been trying to be planful about how we can extend the use of these funds for the longest period of time as well, and not take on recurring costs, because we know that these are effectively one-time funds. We're trying to minimize the taking on of recurring costs where we can. So I know this is a busy slide, but you know, there's basically 11 different grants here totaling just over $4 million in new money that the school district has received. And all of these allocations are basically formula-based, either based upon student enrollment, you know, like a head count factor, or student demographics like the percentage of low-income students. And that's how the formulas were derived and the funds distributed. I would say that, you know, at this point, I'll talk about a few of these things here. You know, the coronavirus prevention grant, that was the state grant that we got. And all of those funds were already expended by June 30th. We used a lot of those for personal protective equipment and some of those other things I mentioned about warehousing and whatnot. We did receive some funding for the food service fund, just over $10,000 to support that operation, because those programs have really taken a hit, especially with the so-called a la carte sales. So all school districts got some monies for their food service accounts. We got some pooled testing money because originally when we began our surveillance testing program, we did not use the state testing program, and in lieu of that, they provided some reimbursement to us. The Coronavirus Relief Fund, just about $1.4 million, provided lots of support for COVID assistance, additional staffing to work in our schools, helping with some cleaning activities. We had to hire lots of staff over the summertime before reopening to plan the reopening, and again, additional nursing and logistics. Pandemic reimbursement is basically just a newer fund that we just got, and that is to help identify students who are eligible for the EBT program, additional food support, and offset some costs for reporting there. So basically that top half, all of those funds basically have already been spent. And I know there's been some media coverage about school districts not spending their money, but from the pandemic all the way up, those funds are already spent. And then you have these other funds below, the ESSER 1, the ESSER 2, the American Rescue Plan, and ESSER 3. And those have been either partially funded or we have commitments to spend those funds out into September of 22, September of 23, September of 24. Again, that's kind of the multi-year run-out aspect of this federal funding that we plan to extend their use. And as the note says, you know, all of these particular grant funds have regulations about their use and restrictions on the use of the funds, just like CARES and FEMA was mentioned earlier by Mr. Mizikar. And speaking of that, we did work closely over the past 12, 18 months, and also to try to maximize the use of the town CARES and FEMA reimbursement, and we were able to expense a number of costs to those funds as well, and we're very grateful for that. Just one example, you know, some of our COVID testing costs were able to be submitted for FEMA reimbursement. So that did not have to all come out of these federal funds that were allocated to school departments. And, you know, just in terms of some other aspects of our financial operations, beyond COVID, we're in negotiations right now with respect to our labor groups. You know, we're in negotiations, of course, with our Shrewsbury Paraprofessionals Association. Their contract expired this past summertime. That's an ongoing negotiation. And then at the end of this school year, effectively, the 3 other labor contracts will expire as well. So the teacher's contract, the assistant principal's contract, which is Unit B, and the Shrewsbury cafeteria workers. So those are all either starting or underway or will soon be underway for negotiation. They all end at the end of this school year. In terms of the fiscal '23 budget development process, we are well into that, and we are certainly mindful of and grateful for the override agreement between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen, and we'll be working within those guidelines to put together the budget plan for fiscal '23. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Dr. Sawyer.
Yeah, if I may, just,
Walensky?
yeah, sure. If I may just comment on that last financial slide. It was noted about our negotiations with the Shrewsbury Paraprofessionals Association that we've had over the last 5 months. We are in the process of seeking mediation, as was mentioned, as we feel we've reached an impasse. We certainly want a fair settlement for both sides. We have tremendous respect for our paraprofessionals and what they do for our students. They do tremendous work, and they are key to our success within the district. So just want to call that out. But as it is Thanksgiving week, we certainly have a lot to be thankful for from Shrewsbury Public Schools perspective. We're certainly very thankful for the partnership that we have with the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager Mizikar. It's really been a game-changing year for budgeting as we look ahead to more financial stability and predictability over the next several years. Really changes the way that we look at how we're going to budget for the next year. We're also certainly continuing to face challenging conditions, as was noted earlier, but I'm also thankful to the town and the community at large for their support of all of the various changes that occurred during a pandemic, as we continue to write the playbook on how to conduct public education during a pandemic. So with that, and just in closing, just thankful to Dr. Sawyer, Mr. Collins, the entire leadership team, all of our educators, paraprofessionals and nurses, and staff and faculty that have kept our students and staff and school community safe over the last 20 months. They're wearing many hats in addition to their day jobs, and very thankful. They're key to success within Shrewsbury Public Schools. So thank you to all of them as well. With that, we're happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. Colleagues, questions or comments? Questions or comments? I have a few, actually. So, quick question. So I want to thank, to your point, Mr. Wensky, recognize all the hard work of the administrators, the teachers, the staff, the school committee, all across the board. Mrs. Cassavant is one who watches all of your meetings. I watched quite a few, but I had participated in a lot more. Many times you think you'd be watching a medical show, just going through a lot of the issues that you had to deal with. Never mind, as you just said, write the playbook. This is a playbook that started with blank pages, and you're writing on the fly. Dr. Sawyer, you talk about strategic planning, and no lifetime would anyone ever predicted any of this. So it's sort of the critical thinking skills that have been applied by administration and staff as well. So I just want to recognize all the hard work, particularly in these unprecedented times. Inflation. So does inflation impact, do you see any impacts for inflation in terms of either materials or even the busing contract? If I remember from years back, there's a CPI component. I don't know how much of that's tied to fuel. Do you see any risks with that going forward?
So in terms of our transportation contract, which is, our single largest contract in the school department, collectively for all the services, it's probably a bit over $4 million. But for fiscal '23, there is a pre-negotiated rate already in place, and it calls for a 2.9% increase overall. Some contracts with respect to school bus transportation do have so-called fuel adjustment clauses, but ours does not. So our transportation vendor, Transportation, when we went into this agreement, understood that and took on the associated risk of that in terms of the pricing model that he proposed. So we're in a safe place with respect to that for fiscal '23.
Okay, thank you. And then just a related question with AA Transportation. I know there's been a lot of stories about bus companies' inability to hire drivers. Have we had any impacts from that in our district?
I have to say that AA Transportation has done an excellent job for Shrewsbury Public Schools. And they are fully staffed. I think they had, when we started the opening of the school year, I think they had one position that they were trying to fill out of about 50 for school bus drivers, which was really good. They've engaged in, and I talked to Mr. Ernenwine about this before the start of the school year, they engaged in a very active recruitment process with billboards along 290, radio spots. They're still actively recruiting. And of course, like any other organization, there is some turnover. But we're in a very fortunate place due to the management of that company by Mr. Ernenwine. And we've maintained a positive relationship with him throughout the pandemic, and we had some agreements during the pandemic about fees for services, and not all districts did that either. So I think that's played to our favor as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I have a few more, but I'll pause.
Can I just,
Yeah, Mr. Mizik.
I just wanted to, I guess, amplify or support Mr. Collins in that previous statement. We made, Mr. Collins, Dr. Sawyer, and the team made some tough decisions in the early days of the pandemic with regards to transportation and how we're going to treat our partners and our vendors. And we continue to have those conversations the whole way through the end of last school year. And I think, supporting the small businesses and that approach had a really great outcome, which was we didn't need the National Guard, and we didn't need some things that other districts had. So I think they should be commended for that work.
Agree. Anyone?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I will. No, I'll wait.
Anyone?
You can finish.
All right, two more. Social and emotional health and well-being. I know through my years on the committee, one of the hardest things to budget related to out-of-district placements. And I know you've talked about in your presentation that that's been a big challenge, amplified by the pandemic. Are we seeing a lot of children leave the district like we saw several years ago? We're able to keep them in the district, and with the additional supports that we have, and I understand that we're looking to provide further supports, that we're able to identify kids earlier than that crisis point.
Sure. Our census on October 1st was really aligned, very similar number of out-of-district students. There's about 52 or so who are out of district. That said, Ms. Belcito has certainly informed me that there are a number of students who may have, and every year there's always some who go out during the year, some who might come back, some who graduate at the end of the year. But there are a larger number than typical at this time of year who are awaiting a potential out-of-district placement. And especially for these kinds of reasons in terms of very significant mental health issues. At the same time, I think the vast majority of what we're dealing with are students who either may have been previously identified with having some of these struggles, and they're amplified by the situation, or students who were not on our radar at all, who are really struggling. And having some really difficult situations, not to the extent that they would likely need an out-of-district placement, but we're working with Student Youth and Family Services as one of our partners. We know, and people have heard this, the mental health resources in our communities, hospitals, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, the waiting lists are massive. The kinds of things that families want to get support for outside of school, they're really having a hard time accessing. Ms. Belcito and her team put together a new resource, which is through William James College, that actually helps people get more specific connections to providers in their own area. But again, there's still, which is better than what just doing it on your own, but there's still significant delays in treatment or being able to be seen. So it is of deep concern to us. We're hoping that things will modulate a bit as we move forward here, but there are a lot of kids out there who are hurting and families, and it's something that obviously school is a big part of that equation. We're adding some counseling staff through the ESSER 3 funds that we're going to sustain for a few years at least and look to bring onto the budget ultimately. We're adding an adjustment counselor at the high school and one at the elementary level, in addition to what we'd already added some positions in recent years. But it is a very significant challenge right now.
Thank you. And then one final question. Assabet, given the unintended consequence that you just talked about, how many kids a year? Is it 25? Up to 40? We had quite a
We
few.
used to run typically somewhere between 25 and 35.
Okay.
Usually lower 30s. And then last year, because they had more demand, they hadn't changed the policy yet, but they were already giving a little more preference to their in-district students, and we only had 15 go this year. But typically over time, it was usually about 30 to 35 a year.
So those students that maybe last year or weren't admitted but wanted that type of high school experience, what would options be available to them, and what in this case? So if we're down to 0, but other communities are in the same boat as we are, is there an opportunity to pull resources, understanding when they tuition out what we pay to Assabet for each student? Is there any scale that we can get there to provide similar opportunities? It's not going to be the garage that we used to have at the high school when we
Right.
put that out many years ago, but is there any opportunity to give something like that?
Yeah, I think, again, looking at, it's something that may be worth exploring. I think that the one thing I think we need to look at is, are there other kinds of academic experiences, or I mentioned one of our strategic goals already was to provide more internships and real-world learning opportunities outside of school. And maybe, how do we do some of those kinds of things for students who might be more inclined for that type of learning? But in terms of joining with other districts, that can get very complicated very quickly as well. And I'm not sure we'd still even have the scale, because you're talking, Clinton, I usually have about 25 kids go, say when we had 30 or 35 kids go. And then the question is like, what and where. But it is of concern to us, unlike some other school districts who frankly would push back on vocational technical schools when they perceive they were recruiting their students because it's more expensive for kids to go there and that sort of thing. Our approach has always been that if it's the right match for a student and it's good for their educational experience, that the tuition we pay to Assabet is kind of the cost of doing business as a community to provide those students what they need. And we've had a really productive partnership, and I know the leadership at Assabet feels badly that this state mandate essentially has created this situation where longtime communities they partner with are probably not going to get much access. Now, we'll still have students there who will be sophomores and juniors and seniors next year. And, it's one of the pieces that I think, it kind of happened in the middle of the pandemic. I have to be honest, I knew I had a conversation with Assabet last year when something was on the docket for the Board of Ed, but it was being voted on like the next day. But I think that, certainly as we learn more about this, some communication from the school committee or myself to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as to what impact this is having on our community is going to be in order, and that's something in the coming weeks and months we'll be doing.
Okay, thanks. Last question, I promise. The first grade, do we know why that number's down? Do we feel that they're going to other local schools? Do we have any data on that, or is the class just smaller? Do we have any thoughts onto that right now?
There's really no specific data right now. It's really quite a surprise, and typically, on average, what you would see is as the kindergarten cohort advances the next year into grade 1, we typically would see about an 18% increase, because for the kindergarten, parents would choose other options, of course, right? Private options or what have you, so we would typically see that. And for that to not have happened this year it's actually a bit puzzling. So we're gonna have to kind of delve into that a little bit more and, see if we're on to some sort of new trend here or if it's just a one-year anomaly.
There's some conjecture. We were really curious what the kindergarten numbers would look like this year because there was sort of what called the red shirting phenomenon. There were families who were not choosing to send their child to kindergarten in the midst of the pandemic and wanted to hold them back a year. But that would suggest that this year's kindergartner would have had an unusual maybe bump. So unless we're still in the same situation where those kids got redshirted, but there's kids being redshirted this year who are gonna show up next year. So we're gonna have to see a 2 or 3 year, 4-year trend to see what's going on with this. I also wonder about, typically we would tend to see, I don't have a number on this, but we'd tend to see a fair amount of people who would choose to move to the community when their students became roughly kindergarten or first grade age. And just in terms of whether families or not, we're not making that decision. And of course, the real estate market is what it is. But it could be a lot of factors, but we'll have to see if this turns into a trend or if it's a blip for a couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Mr. DiPaolo?
Just, I guess, a couple of quick, one quick one. Mr. Collins, how has I understand what's happening right now in the first grade, but our long-range projections versus enrollment over the past several years, has it been close?
So prior to COVID, the enrollment projections, certainly like on a 3 to 5 year basis, were very close. And as we have a report that's going actually to the school committee next week. We haven't provided it yet. But certainly the projections that were made, 5 years ago about where we would be right now in this time, we're certainly below that mark. And so there's there's certainly some COVID effect happening. But it also looks like there could be a trend of the curve bending downward as well. So that could be, we could be there in terms of a slight decrease in projected enrollments for the future.
That was a little bit anticipated way back anyways, right? That it would drop down a little bit at some point. Not a lot, but it would just have a new.
Yeah, it wasn't that, dramatic. And I think, things like, it will be interesting to see, because these models are really just quantitative models looking at the numbers of years past. They're not really factoring external factors like what's happening with development and, the Edgemere property or age-restricted properties in the community that might be, possible in the future, and housing turnover, for people that live in Shrewsbury that might want to go to age-restricted, and then that becomes their house available, and you get families moving in. So, we have to take a look at the models and understand what they're trying to, what they can look at and what they're not controlling for as well.
Actually,
Mr. DiPaolo, go ahead.
on the 55 and over, that phenomenon of people moving out, moving into 55 and over communities in town, actually, because of something else that the board was doing, we actually analyzed what happened when who was moving into 55 and over communities, and the original, the conventional wisdom was people from Shrewsbury are going to want to stay in Shrewsbury and move into those. And what we found is overwhelmingly that was not the case. There were a lot of people, but most of the people who moved in, believe it or not, were from out of town. And when people did move from Shrewsbury into a 55, it didn't have what you would have expected would happen, where you got the empty nesters move out, younger adults move in, they have kids. It wasn't very dramatic. It really wasn't. It was surprising. It's just interesting that what we thought would have happened didn't. But anyways, just an aside. It was an interesting set of stats to look at. If I could. So going back to vocational students, Mr. Samir, I think, covered most of what I wanted to cover, but with the way this thing is going to break out, except for maybe, even the agricultural school, are these students effectively shut out from going, if this follows the model that you think is going to follow, they effectively shut out of going to a vocational school anywhere?
Unless there is a school that is not going to fill all of its seats with their own member community students, and we have not found a school in the local area that's not going to be the case.
Yeah.
That's going to be the effective. You're going to have about a third of the towns in the Commonwealth who can't access these schools, if the local schools anywhere, in a reasonable distance are full with their own community students. And we all know there's extremely high demand, because vocational technical education is one of the biggest success stories in the Commonwealth of the education reform era since the early 1990s. It's the envy of the entire nation. It's been, there is a huge demand and need to increase vocational technical seats in the Commonwealth, period. Maybe that'll be a silver lining of this situation. It'd be wonderful if Assabet could add enough seats that it could accommodate their member communities plus other communities. And of course, it gets tricky because the communities who are the members are bearing the capital costs of their renovation that happened about 7 years ago or so. We've had a pretty good deal that we're just paying tuition on a per head basis, it worked based on the way the system was set up. But this is definitely a major change, and I think that the state's going to have to give some very strong consideration to, how they're going to address this, because it doesn't seem to be a fair situation because from no fault of the communities, from decisions made decades ago, that students today are going to pay the price for that, who not having access to something that, we would want more kids to have access to.
Yeah, we've been pushing students to go into the trades for how many years, and now that opportunity's gone. That's interesting how they would make a change so drastic like that without phasing it in or whatever. I just have one last one.
Sure.
As far as dealing with students who are having emotional needs, or I know you have counselors in school. You have a lot of counselors in school, right? Currently, I mean,
I wouldn't say a lot.
Oh,
We-
but, I mean,
it was a place
it's
we kind of
ramped
fell
up over
behind
the
where we
past
should have been.
several years because of the needs and growing.
Yep.
But so if a student's being counseled in school during the school day, that at the end of the school day, are there add-on services that they would get? Do they go somewhere else do they have somebody to back up, like a wraparound?
We do work with, whether that's a family's, if they do have another provider, psychiatrist or psychologist or counselor, oftentimes we try to work in concert with them. The responsibility of the school psychologists and counselors is really to provide support for how students can appropriately and productively function in school. It's not our responsibility to delve into issues that might be more appropriate for an outside counselor who might be providing family therapy or some other kind of therapy based on a student's mental health needs. And so, there are certainly boundaries there, and that's where, there are times where, again, we have an excellent partner in Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services who provide us interns to help us with some additional supports. Sometimes they're providing service outside of school, and we're able to coordinate some of those things. But the system overall is not a particularly robust or strong system in our society, unfortunately. I think that's hopefully going to get better, but the fact that it was already a burgeoning mental health crisis among youth prior to the pandemic, and it's been accelerated significantly as a result.
I was just wondering how the other providers, the traditional providers, not the school systems, worked with the school systems to provide some kind of a seamless coordination of services, because obviously I realize that the schools can't do everything, but obviously mental health issues don't stop when school stops.
No, for sure.
And issues in the homes don't stop. I was just wondering, how
Yeah.
you worked on that, if it was possible. And are there even resources in the private sector to be able to do that?
Again, I think we do that where we can, and there's a lot of coordination that comes in, but, I think unfortunately we're seeing is that by default, most of the support a lot of students are getting is school-based because we're there, and they are having trouble accessing even anything outside because the wait lists are so long.
I happen to have friends in the industry, they said that, as a result of COVID, there was already a backlog. COVID's just made it worse, and they're not even taking new patients. And that's not something like having a little problem like elective surgery, they can wait. You have a mental health issue, it needs to be dealt with now, not 6, 7 months from now. So I was just wondering, I know you can't do everything. I was just wondering how that worked with the private sector. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question per se, but not to prolong the meeting. I just, I have 3 children in the school system right now, and just want to say thank you. I think that I love seeing you give recognition to the teachers and the staff, the paraprofessionals. I mean, from where I sit as an end user, it makes a huge difference, not just academically, but you know, across every facet of their lives right now. And just in a lighthearted moment, the school committee meeting is always on in our house too, more because of my husband than me. But Dr. Sawyer, your agenda emails are the one thing that I pay attention to. Your zinger at the end is just, it makes my day. So
It's going to create a lot more pressure, Ms.
you
Flynn.
deserve some props for it. It really is. It's pretty good.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Mrs. Cassavant.
Well, I just want to respond to a couple of comments that I heard. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I am guilty of watching pretty much all your meetings, not necessarily live, but still. YouTube is great. Mr. Samia, you were talking about the possibility for the school department to offer some sort of vocational comparable education. Having a child who graduated from Assabet last year, I can't imagine where you would even start. That program in and of itself is masterful in taking kids for whom a traditional high school educational program that we offer at Shrewsbury High School is not the correct fit. And they need that ability to have the 1 week on academics and the 1 week on focusing on a hands-on shop type setting where they're focused on a career-based experience. And we think about all that the schools are being tasked with right now. I almost think it makes more sense to appeal to the state and to say, you know, this is a need. I listened to your report about where our 2021 students ended up, and you noted an increase in students seeking post-high school vocational training. And I think that's indicative of the pent-up demand for moving on into those types of career fields. And, you know, if we want the electricians and we want the healthcare professionals and we want the HVAC techs when we need them, then we need to be feeding that system. So, I mean, I think it's just a complete loss for the current 8th graders to know that that avenue of a high school education isn't open to them. And if it was my child and I heard this, I would be just devastated, just knowing the value of that education at Assabet and knowing that, you know, Shrewsbury did tuition and paid that tuition for my child to be able to have that experience. And then the other thing, just speaking to your comment, Mr. DiPaolo, I think it would be great if there was an opportunity for the schools to be able to provide some sort of wraparound service or connection to further mental health services for students. We're very open in our household as far as trying to access mental health care. Even as someone with great insurance, the wait lists are so long. You will go on a wait list and it's a year. When I called in June for one of my children, it was a year wait list. You'd still be waiting. I can't even imagine what you're facing as far as mental health needs. And I know further on in the agenda, you know, we're going to be talking about using the ARPA money to further bolster the services that are offered through Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. And for so many people, that's where they're having to go in the community, and still there you have a wait list of 6 months. And you're absolutely right, Mr. DiPaolo, when mental health issues surface, it's often beyond the point at which you needed some help. And it's not just an effect on the person who's having the mental health needs, it's the whole family, because it's the whole family that's involved. And, you know, any support that students are receiving at school is probably only scratching the surface of the greater need within not only that student's own personal life, but for their family. So I just think it's a whole lot of needs there.
You said that a lot better than me.
It's because I live it every day, so I understand what you're seeing. And I definitely commend you for the work you're doing to try to support students and their families. Thank
Can I
you.
say one more thing?
Then let me go to Mr. LeBeau.
Oh, good. Okay.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Early in the presentation on the the vision slide about portrait of a graduate, and Dr. Sawyer, you particularly noted one of the elements, global citizenship and engagement, and you mentioned how more important that might be as a result of recent events. I recall, I believe, in the early 2000s, as a result of MCAS coming in and certain demands being placed on the district to provide certain types of education, it was necessary to discontinue the civics program in the high school. I think it was by the people, if I recall correctly. I know much later on, DESE changed their framework in 2018 about social studies, and I do recall a presentation to the school committee, I think in the fall before COVID, relative to so I'm just curious, what is the district doing now relative to civics education?
Sure, well, we're definitely adapting, what the state's framework shifts were, which is to include some very specific content at the 8th grade level that's focused on sort of the origins of governments. That's always been sort of an ancient history piece. They're preserving some of that, but the big focus with Greece and Rome is really sort of the advent of the democratic process and so forth, the origins of democracy. And then at the high school level, in working into the U.S. History courses, some civics elements and some hands-on civics projects. The first time we did that last year towards the end of the school year, it was our junior class who were all responsible to do a project that had something to do with working in the community. There are more steps, and I don't pretend to have the expertise that Ms. Clouder, our assistant superintendent for curriculum, would have, or Ms. DeFrancesca, who's the social sciences director at the high school. But in terms of we're definitely have moved in that direction. I think we have some more work to do, but I think it is a healthy shift that the state made, because I think like Shrewsbury, a lot of places ended up de-emphasizing some of the civics pieces in order to get other content in that we were being held accountable for. So I think that's good. I believe you might have an expert in your family who's probably living this to some degree, a former student of mine and graduate of Shrewsbury High School who now teaches the social science and history. But it's a critical area, and I think all of us see in different ways, and we could have a longer conversation with this one, and I apologize for the length, although we do represent a great deal of what with the services we provide the town, but I know we weren't very long with this presentation. But in terms of, it's a really important element, and I think as we get back into some more normalcy here, we're going to continue to look at our efforts for what we can best do to make sure our students get a strong civics education by the time they graduate.
Well, I know you have to make it all fit, and you have to make it all work, and there's a lot of demands placed upon the district that isn't the district's decision. I'm pleased to see something's being done at the high school level. I think, at lower levels as well. I do think the district might have hit a peak. If I recall, kids were taking U.S. history. The By the People program was a separate, I think it was a one-semester program.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Totally dedicated to civics education, and I would encourage the district, as I think it's already doing, to consider any and all ways that it can bolster that. But thank you.
Yep, so noted.
You think, Mr. DePaul?
Just, I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on the great work that you did through the entire, well, we're still in it, but in the depths of it and the real difficult parts of adjusting to this new environment. I honestly was just amazed at what you were able to do. I know you worked for like 15, 18 months of standing on quicksand. And having to react so quickly, you, the teachers, all the staff, I just think it was incredible. And I'm really in awe of what you were able to do. Mr. Collins, I don't know if you ever slept, but it just, you did, I think you did a masterful job. And I know that from what I saw from the outside, that remote learning, hybrid or whatever form, it was difficult across the nation, but I do think that your foresight in starting to use the iPads several years ago seemed to have made it a little easier. From what I saw in other school systems, I had a grandchild who was in a different school system, and from what I saw that she was dealing with other people I knew in Shrewsbury, I think that yours was a lot more effective, because I think you got to jump on it, and you you were a little more prepared than everybody else. So I really commend your foresight and really all the efforts that everybody put in. I honestly don't know how you did it. And I think you
makes
just
two
did a
of us.
great job. You deserve a lot of credit for it. And I hope as difficult as it was, I hope that the community, and I think it does, appreciate what you were able to do, especially making it up as you go in the beginning. So I just want to thank you for the great job and commend you everything you did, the entire school department, and staff, everybody. You did a great job.
Thank you. It's an amazing team, and we're very fortunate to have the quality of people we have in the department.
Any other questions under this item? If not, I'll move into the next item, which, under item 8, joint meeting with the school committee regarding the May 4th, 2021 override commitment. So in connection with the override, the school committee and Board of Selectmen had adopted 2 documents. There was initially an override statement to the residents of Shrewsbury, the purpose of which the Board of Selectmen and school committee, the elected leaders of the town of Shrewsbury, had developed this document to convey context on and their respective commitment with respective to the May 4th, 2021 override ballot question, how the funds will be managed. And then below it outlined the commitments that the various boards made. There was a second document, the override framework between the Board of Selectmen and School Committee, also adopted on May 16th, the purpose of which the Board of Selectmen and School Committee collectively identified as leadership. Throughout this document, acknowledge and agree to work together within the context of the commitments they have made and what I just talked about to the residents of the town of Shrewsbury through the override statement to the residents of Shrewsbury, March 16th, 2021. This document provides greater detail regarding potential future situations that may arise and how they will be handled. Specifically, under acknowledgements number 4, it says leadership will hold at least 2 joint public meetings annually to better inform each other of their ongoing work. So in addition to the departmental update, this is also the first of 2 meetings that will cover make sure that we meet the commitments that we had made to the residents of Shrewsbury. I think one other element that's in here is transparency, so I think it's very important to go through everything that we just heard about, so residents of Shrewsbury in a non-budget cycle context, so they can learn about the operational activities, that their investment. We talk a lot about education and investment in our youth, and our town really does a great job in investing in our youth and does it wisely and efficiently. So that is why we are here. Obviously Dr. Sawyer and Mr. Collins and Mr. Wensky provided the school department's sort of update as to where we are, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Mizikar to provide an update on revenues and our side of the bargain per se.
Sure. So it's a pleasure just to run through a high-level overview and comparison. Really what my goal is this evening is just to ensure that we provide an update with the initial look at fiscal year 23 revenues coming up for this budget cycle. I'll do a quick comparison to where we were on March 16th when we locked in the financial model in pursuit of the override. And then just think about next steps as we move a little bit closer and have all the initial revenues as far as state aid and all those other things. So really high-level overview. I just want to talk about the percentages of the budget. So we continue to see consistency across the years with our revenue sources, primarily driven through the tax levy and state aid, and then utility revenues are all balanced and solely support the operations of those groups and do provide funding into the operating budget for Department of Public Works related oversight and limited instances funds and general administrative oversight within the financial sectors of the organization. Local receipts, which this board, the Board of Selectmen has talked about recently, we're very pleased with the results of fiscal year 2021 and the economic recovery, at least as shown through local receipts being a V-shaped recovery and getting back to fiscal year 2019 levels with only experiencing the dip in fiscal year 20. So fiscal year 21 was very strong, $2.6 million greater than the budget estimate that we put into place at the start of the year. So in total, we're proposing the initial use of $164,140,263 in available resources for use throughout the various aspects of operating capital and other expense needs for the town. Within this slide, I wanted to, this is just a reiteration of a subset of those revenues. The biggest difference here is the difference in utility revenues in the bottom line. I will focus on the green lines, the base tax levy, the state aid, and Schedule A receipts. Those are the recurring revenue sources that I think drive the conversations as we move forward into the budget process and allows us to compare most responsibly for future needs of the community. So when we looked at these numbers in March of 2021, we were projecting $128,484,349. And fortunately, and mainly driven through local receipts numbers, or that being the largest difference, we are in a better position than we had anticipated, which is great news. And we see that we have about $646,473 that we'll offer into the revenue resources for the budget process. In addition to what we had thought we would have had back in March. So I'm pleased that, that number's higher, local receipts, again, being the largest category. Those documents that Mr. Samia has referenced obviously provides some required set-asides. And when you set the funds aside for like stabilization, a general stabilization account and additional funds into override stabilization, you're left with about $420,000 year over year that could be available for enhancing one-time expenditures that won't have a deleterious effect on the duration of the override. So that's really what I wanted to talk about, is just providing that quick snapshot, affirming the model that we all talked about in March, that we have those resources in place slightly ahead of where we thought we would have been. And now we'll move into the kind of the details of the departmental budgets on both sides, and then I think reconvene at least informally before fiscal projection 1 to determine the path forward for the rest of the budget process before we hit finance committee and things like that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? And part of that and part of the commitment will be to do a refresh essentially of our projection, which would be at that time as well as part of the commitment. Any questions or comments? The only other thing I wanted to note is just I wanted to thank Mr. Mizikar, Dr. Sawyer, and Mr. Collins, who speak regularly. This is a collaborative process through their hard work, through the modeling, through doing what they say and saying what they do. So we fully appreciate all of your efforts. I also want to recognize members of the school committee. We speak regularly. We communicate regularly. Collaboration's important. I think this exemplifies efficient and effective local government. So I thank you as well and look forward to consistently talking throughout this process and working forward to meet our commitment to the community for the next several years. So thank you. Anything else? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions from any of you? Thank you for coming. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you. Next item, actually under 9, under new business, to review and act on the road closure. We do not need to undertake that, right, Mr. Mizikar? The proponent of that request has completed his work. Next item, under 10, to review and act on the recommendation to fund an initial round of initiatives and projects under the America Rescue Plan Act. That is ARPA. Mr. Mizikar, if I could I'll turn over the next few items to you after I announce them, but under item 10, please.
I gotta find this slide deck.
Thank you.
Got it, yep. Shoot, don't do that. All right. So it's my goal this evening to make a recommendation to the board with regards to a first phase of funding for our American Rescue Plan Act allocation, which comes from the federal government through that similarly named legislation that was passed in March of 2021. It's known specifically as the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, and it provides municipalities across the country with the ability to make expenditures for costs that are incurred from March 11th, 2021, the passage of the bill into law, and through December 31st, 2024. That's the date that the commitments contractually have to be made by, and then there can be a run-out period on those expenditures through December 31st of 2026. So just a reminder, these numbers have not changed, but the town has been allocated $11,515,685 through the American Rescue Plan Act. And to date, we've received throughout the summer months with two separate allocations, $5,757,842.43. So with this conversation tonight, I'm not proposing allocating or setting aside the full use of all $5.7 or $5.8 million. This initial phase of recommendations proposes the use of $4,749,680. And the identification of phase one is simply my terminology. It's not tied to anything in the federal bill. We could introduce phase two. We can have a conversation about what gets funded in phase one and what we may want to delay. This is just a way that we'll manage and track the funds and provide transparency back to the board and to the residents. So that's the sole purpose behind phase one, is just this is our initial offering. So specifically within this recommendation, roughly $1.9 million would be within the public health response area, which has two categories. Through the formulaic process identified through the legislation and subsequent rules of the U.S. Treasury, there's just shy of $650,000 available to be set aside for revenue loss. And then we're proposing and recommending the use of $2.2 million for infrastructure improvements. So I'll walk through the various projects that we're recommending within the categories. So within public health impacts, in the direct response to the public health challenges associated with the pandemic and responding to COVID-19, we're proposing a series of projects that total $1,362,200. First and foremost, it's providing additional resources through our intermunicipal agreement with the City of Worcester for public health services. All the general demands that are placed upon the Worcester Department of Public Health, who serves as our public health agents, for 3 fiscal years, fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. The largest funding area outside of physical infrastructure that I'm recommending this evening is a 4-year commitment to Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services to increase their capacity to overcome the extreme increase in mental health challenges and requests for services through that organization. It's a $606,000 investment in that organization, which would provide the opportunity to hire 3 additional mental health clinicians. And those clinicians would provide services to the residents of Shrewsbury. And there is some ancillary administrative and overhead costs that would be included. This would be a expanded contractual relationship with that organization. Additional epidemiological support through UMass, through the Worcester Department of Public Health, that would allow us to further analyze and detail the data. There's a new pilot initiative through UMass that we can take advantage of. This would provide funding and support for those details. I thought at some point in time we wouldn't have to recommend this, as we may be moving into a phase with just lower numbers and not seeing a lot of details required, but as we get into challenges associated with understanding how effective boosters are, breakthrough cases, all what I think are very common and responsible questions, we would rely upon a contract through Worcester Department of Public Health to do that detailed analysis. Finally, on this slide is a proposal for additional mental health collaboration with the Shrewsbury Public Schools, Central Mass Regional Public Health Alliance, and Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for school-aged in-person mental health support and programming and education within the Shrewsbury Public Schools. These provide the balances of our direct response to the pandemic, providing a support to the Shrewsbury Public Schools for their test and stay program to cover the cost of their rental facility for that testing program. The establishment of a test and stay and enhanced employee testing program and covering the costs that were previously covered under the CARES Act for the Shrewsbury Town Employee Testing Program. We're proposing to establish a new and enhanced communication strategy, potentially in partnership with the UMass Collins Center, which would provide an emphasis to us to have deeper communications throughout the community with a greater emphasis on non-homeowner residents who are disproportionately impacted, given physical factors related to their living in closer quarters and apartment communities, more densely populated communities. We don't have good insight into the needs of those residents. Oftentimes, but not always, those residents are of lower income and were more significantly and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We don't have good ways to communicate with them. We don't have a firm understanding of the financial and other challenges that those individuals are facing, and it's our attempt through this project to build those channels of communication, both with landlords and the residents who are living in those type of housing situations within the community. Improve all two-way communications with residents, businesses, to, again, firm up the pipeline and ensure proper communication for both emergency and non-emergency communications. And finally, to fund a community survey to be issued in 2022 to gather feedback on town services and build a strategic plan with the residents as we move through calendar year 2022. And then the final three projects related to the direct impact of the direct response to the pandemic would be heating and ventilation upgrades in 3 buildings where there's currently deficiencies and our air quality and fresh air turnover does not meet what's known as ASHRAE standards, which is a international standards organization within the HVAC realm. So this would improve the mechanical ability to provide fresh air into critical buildings and spaces within those buildings where there are none. There are certain sections of Patton Elementary School and Oak Middle School that doesn't have any fresh air and limited our ability to provide educational services during the pandemic. And within the town hall specifically, which serves as the town's emergency operations center and critical information technology infrastructure housed within this, we're proposing upgrading the HVAC system. So again, direct response to the public pandemic, or to the pandemic, excuse me. We're proposing, recommending spending $1,362,200. There's a whole set of details and 50-some pages of interim rules that have been set by the U.S. Treasury, and town staff have engaged in seminars with the State Department of Revenue, the U.S. Treasury, the National League of Cities, the International City Management Association to build confidence in making these recommendations. There's transparency required throughout, reporting to the federal government required throughout for all these categories. And we have to demonstrate the need and properly document the outcomes from the use of these funding. So again, this is the first category, and I think it would maybe just want to pause here and see if there's any questions on this initial 10 projects that we're proposing.
Any questions? Mrs. Cassavant?
So I was really glad to see, as I alluded to before, the commitment to the 4 years for mental health counseling and increasing the capacity at SYFS. So what would that look like beyond the 4 years if we wanted to be able to maintain that, the 3 additional mental health clinicians? Because I can't imagine that we're going to have less people who need mental health services. I would think it's either going to be steady or it would rise.
Right. So the funding required on an annual basis for those support services is $202,000. So this will provide us with a long on-ramp to consider and allocate ongoing resources through the budget process. So plainly enhance annual funding from the warrant article that we propose at town meeting every year to backfill this over that 4-year period. So it doesn't, the 4-year period will cost $808,000 in today's dollars. So this gives us that nice steady on-ramp where we can slowly add more dollars on an annual basis and not burden the budget process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. DiPaolo?
I am really pleased that we're able to help Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. They've done a lot of work for us over the years. I think they've only gotten better. The need is certainly there. And I'm glad we're able to do that because I think it's important. We talked about that with the schools. Mental health is just an issue now that seems to just permeate every discussion about our society. So I'm glad we were able to do that. I like, and I read a little bit about, I think today I had asked you to send me something on the communication strategy. It looks like it's well thought out, probably going to be fine-tuned as you go along, but I think it's a good idea because I know, I didn't know you were actually planning on doing this, but I know we talked about how do we reach out to people that are in need. We don't know how to communicate with them. So I think that's going to give us a lot of long-term benefits. It's amazing that so much of this is really related to, I know that section is, but somehow or another this, it seems to revolve a lot around the whole thing, around public health and that kind of stuff, which I think is important. So I like what you're proposing. I think we could all make an argument for almost every one of them that more money could be used, but I think this is a good place to start. I think you did a good job putting this stuff together. So,
Any other questions, comments? Please continue.
So I think it's just important, and I appreciate the comments to, the process that we used internally was to allow, request departments submit their ideas within the framework that was set out through the U.S. Treasury's interim rules and the various buckets set forth through through the law. So, this is the collaboration of the whole team whenever we look at these project proposals. The second aspect within really the public health impact is the town's economic response. It's responding to the negative economic impacts of the pandemic, and it's to mitigate economic harm to workers, households, small businesses, affected industries, and the public sector. And the first two categories really are focused on the public sector and being able to respond in a more remote based work setting that will obviously benefit us well into the future. So this is the digitization of documents and plans to allow more public access into our records that are currently only in hard copy. And this need was exacerbated by the pandemic, where we relied upon physical documentation for individuals to come in and actually view plans for water and sewer connections into our system. and things like that. So they'll still be restricted and limited in some, so we're not going to violate the lessons that we learned after September 11th, 2001, but we'll be able to enhance the ability for people to access information and materials that they need to perform work without physically coming into the building, while being more transparent at the same time. Very similarly, just being able to disseminate a very clean and cohesive budget book without passing out 3-ring binders, also enhancing everyone's ability to access clear and transparent data with regards to our budget, very searchable. So this provides 2 years of funding for a digital budget book. This will provide efficiency in our budget process as far as total staff time that's needed to develop the documents that we've all come to expect. The final 2 programs are more public-facing. The first is a small business recovery grant program. And like some of the other aspects that are proposed this evening, we don't have all the details. This is more of a funding set-aside. There's a broad variety of programs that we could introduce and offer to businesses who can demonstrate revenue loss, laying off employees, and other economic hardships between really 2019, 2000 and 2001. So there's a lot of physical financial documentation that we'll need to review as we consider funding various benefits to businesses. The exact programs that we're going to offer may range from direct assistance to grants to grant and loan programs for physical improvements to spaces, enhancing outdoor dining opportunities, and things like that. There's a lot of to be determined aspects of this funding category. From the Planning and Economic Development Department, originally $100,000 was requested through this first amount of funding, but again, let's get the program set up. Let's have engagement with the businesses, which is a challenge to start with, which we need to put some resources in place to do, but you know, it's kind of to be determined a little bit in this category that we'll flesh out and keep the board advised of. And then planning, design, and implementation of physical improvements to town outdoor recreation areas. Clearly, we saw a lot of individuals' response during the pandemic, since they weren't traveling, was to get out and be in the community and utilize the assets within the parks. There's a heavy emphasis on Dean Park. We have a lot of other public park assets that need to be matured, and this would begin that planning process and also move into physical work within those spaces for additional walking opportunities. A couple ideas that may come to fruition, may not. As you know, Dean Park, you have to walk on the roadways in order to circumnavigate the park. How can we get people onto safer sidewalks and trails? And things like that. So a number of ideas that we'll bring to fruition. And I guess going back to Selectman DiPaolo's previous comments, this is, again, you know, an initial phase of funding where there's about $1 million left on the table. We have another $5.7 million coming next summer. So how do we put ourselves in the best situation to make the most of these resources? So this is more of an intro and early investigation into those type of investments in the future.
Any questions on this part of Mr. Mizakar's presentation?
Just one comment.
Sure.
You mentioned parks, and I know we've had conversations in the past about Edgemere Park, and I think this is a great opportunity where you said to focus on other parks other than Dean Park, that there's a park that could use a little TLC, and hopefully that will be part of the overall plan here going forward.
Yeah, more parks and more neighborhoods is a goal to serve all aspects of the community.
Bless you. Mr. DiPaolo.
I just, what Mr. Mizikar was saying, we pick up some efficiencies with some of the stuff. I really think that digitizing a lot of the stuff in DPW and plant in the engineering department is going to also give tremendous efficiencies to the staff, because there's a lot of great documents up in the library, but to take time to have to go to leave the building, go up there, come back, try to sort through it, where you could do it online and in seconds is going to make a huge difference, I think. And I know there's a lot of other documents that will help out too. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies that are gonna come out of that. That's gonna be a really good payback, I think. So it's good. I mean, it's good we're able to do it, because we've talked about it for years.
Any other questions or comments? If you wanna continue, Mr. Mizikar.
So within the Rescue Plan Act, the next category is premium pay. We're not making any recommendations within this category this evening, but I didn't want to not acknowledge it, so it is there and would be available for conversation now or in the future. The third primary area is revenue loss, and as we talked about, there's about $650,000 available. And that is the revenue loss that we've identified from the period of January 1st through December 31st of 2020. We'll get another look and able to run that formula and calculation again for the period of January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021, once we finalize the financials and understand the revenues. I think there's a small possibility that we may be able to identify some additional revenue loss because of the 4.1% annual escalator that we're allowed to apply to actual revenues received. But I do think that that would be the last period, as tax revenue will increase with the new tax bills, which will be due after January 1st. So throughout the special town meeting budget process in October, the board allocated $291,185 in expenditures to help offset increases to the tax rate. So that leaves $358,000 remaining in this category.
Here's a question.
Go ahead, Mr.
So
DePaolo.
those funds that you're talking about, they have to be allocated through town meeting vote, or can
They
you
don't.
do it?
There's no town meeting requirement of any of these.
Right, so it's without,
That's correct.
appropriation.
Correct. Yep. The final category is investments in infrastructure, water and sewer. So we're allowed to expend American Rescue Plan Act funds on any projects that are eligible for federal or state revolving funds, which are well-known, well-documented sources of funding for those in the DPW world. It's actually the financial mechanism that we use to fund projects like the water treatment plant. So we're very familiar with the do's and don'ts for those project categories. And we're recommending $2,241,100 be allocated for Clinton Street water main replacement, which is high on the list of improvements that are required within the water system in the coming years. And we find that project's total amount and future development in that area would benefit from this investment at this time. So just to summarize, within the three categories, we're proposing again $1,859,245 in public health response, which includes direct response and economic impacts. And then the investment in infrastructure of $2,241,100 for that Clinton Street project.
Any other questions or comments at this point? If not, you need us to approve the initial recommendation?
Yes, I would.
Assuming we agree. If so, could I get a motion?
Move we approve the manager's recommendations to fund an initial round of initiatives and projects under the American Rescue Plan Act.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that recommendation and that report. Next item is number 11, review and act on the Insurance Advisory Committee's recommendation to revise the health insurance premium contributions for active employees effective for fiscal year 2023. Mr. Mizikar.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. DePaolo.
As in last meeting, I think I need to recuse myself.
These are
from
only
this.
active plans.
What?
These are just active.
Just the active
Just
ones?
the active.
Okay, I guess not, I'll stay. Thank you.
Nice try.
So, board members, you're aware that Fallon Health has decided to cease its commercial insurance operations and only focus on Medicare-eligible plans and government-subsidized plans. So with that, we have been working over the time since April 1st when they made that announcement to find a suitable replacement. We are part of the joint purchasing agency, the West Suburban Health Group. But Shrewsbury, as a municipality, 85% of our employees take Fallon Health currently. And we've worked with the West Suburban Health Group and our own insurance advisory committee to find a suitable price alternative or a network that we can be most attractive or similarly attractive to our employees. Fallon Health was the lowest cost option. The lowest cost option benefits the employees and benefits the town because overall costs are obviously cheaper than other networks. So the West Suburban Health Group moved to basically replace the Fallon price point with Blue Cross Blue Shield effective July 1st, 2022. And with that change, the town needed to reconsider, or we need to reconsider our contribution strategy. That is how much the town contributes to active employees' health insurance and how much the employees contribute to that premium. So previously, the ranges for Fallon were 73% and 78% town contributions. The employees picked up the rest of the premium. But for Blue Cross Blue Shield, it was 60-40 split. So we're recommending, since the price model is shifting away from Fallon and towards Blue Cross, to replicate the Fallon model to the new Blue Cross network. Some details are provided within your packet, but we'll continue to stay at the 78 and 73% contribution strategy. With the only changes, it's not going to be network focused, meaning it won't be the narrow network and the broad network having the differences in the pricing strategy. We're going to try to incentivize employees into the high deductible plans. So the high deductible plans will receive the 78% contribution, and the benchmark plans will receive the 73%. So the high deductible plans are lower cost plans. The town does contribute to employees' health savings accounts at a rate of 50% of the current deductibles. And being able to do that still saves both the town and employees money in comparison to the benchmark plans. The only other change that we're proposing is further incentivizing the high deductible plans within Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim. Those are the other two networks that are offered through the West Suburban Health Group. We would be increasing the town's contributions from 60% to 63% for those plans. And that contribution increase is to incentivize employees to go there, because even with that 3% increase and the payment into the health savings account, the town would stand to save between $2,000 and $3,000 annually for any employees that would shift from benchmark plans into those high deductible plans. So our goal is to continue to be able to provide meaningful health insurance benefits to our employees while managing cost. And the total impact of this pre-rate renewal for fiscal year 23 is less than 3%. And without making these changes, employees would be subject to a 30 or 40% annual increase in their contribution to health insurance if they went from Fallon to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and more if they went to other networks. So the Insurance Advisory Committee unanimously recommends the adoption of these change in contribution strategies. Happy to answer any questions of the board.
Any questions or comments?
Can I just ask one question?
Mr. DiPaolo?
I understand what HPHC means. What does NWB mean? I thought.
Oh, sorry, that's Network Blue. That's the name of the.
Oh, Network Blue?
Yeah, that's the name of the Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Okay. I'm looking for BCBS.
Yep.
I couldn't find it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion you need approval of this recommendation as well? Correct.
Move approval of the Insurance Advisory Committee's recommendation to revise health insurance premium contributions for active employees effective fiscal year 23.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Number 12, review and act to authorize the chairman to sign the Massachusetts School Building Authority Initial Compliance Certification for Oak Middle School, which is included within our packet. Mr. Mizikar has reviewed that and assured that we are ready, willing, and able to sign that, given what we're asked to certify. So is there a motion?
Motion that the Motion that we authorize
That's right.
the chair to sign the document for MSBA.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is to review and act on the one-day beer and wine license request of John Ethier, Greater Good Imperial Brewing Company for the Shrewsbury Town Center Association Yuletide Market on December 4th, 2021, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, is this in the packet? I just don't see it.
It's, yeah,
It is there.
Okay, I'm just,
standalone.
Chairman?
I don't see number 13.
It's 14, right? It's listed under 14, that's why.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, I should have been able to count to 14.
Mr. DeFalco, did you have a question?
Before you go on with that, first, I got a point of clarification. These don't need to be advertised, do they, Taylor?
They're one-day licenses.
Okay, they do, I didn't think, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and they're repeat.
I'm confused that Greater Good is only looking for 5 to 8 because the Yuletide is 4 to 8.
It's 5,
What?
isn't it?
I thought it was 4 to 8.
I thought the lighting was 4:45, and then the market
The lighting
opened
might
at
be
5.
4:45, but I think the thing opens at 4.
The event applied for 2 different one-day licenses. This one's 5 to 8 and the other one's 3 to 9.
The event is only 5 to 8?
Mm-hmm. That's what the posters say.
I'm pretty sure it's only 5 to 8. Only
We
because
just
I
have-
did the sign-up
we could-
genius for the Rotary
No.
Club,
Could
so.
offer broader hours, and they don't.
Well, I was
have
going
to
to say, could we, look at, the Rotary Club is asking for 3 to 9, and it's the same event. So there's something out of whack. They don't need to do it if they don't want to, but I think it would be a good idea to put it in concert with what the Rotary Club is doing, so they have flexibility, because otherwise, if that isn't right, they're going to need a special meeting, because this thing is on the 4th, so.
Yep.
Well, I would agree with what you're saying. I did just look it up, and it is 5 to 8 that evening.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, often applicants ask for a little, I'll call it grace period. I'm not sure that's the proper terminology, but before and after an event, there is still dealing with liquor, not necessarily providing liquor. So with that, I move that the board approve the one-day beer and wine license request of John Ethier, Greater Good Imperial Brewing Company for the Shrewsbury Town Center Association Yuletide Market on December 4th from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item is to review and act on the one-day beer and wine license request of Moira Miller, Rotary Club of Shrewsbury, the Shrewsbury Town Center Association Yuletide Market on December 4th, 2021, from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Item 15, review and act on the one-day all-alcohol license request of Joe Youssef, St. Mary's Syriac Orthodox Church for a New Year's Eve party from 5 p.m. on December 31st, 2021 to 2 a.m. on January 1st, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
They've been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next item is to review and act on the potential closure of town buildings and alternative work schedule for staff on Thursday, December 3rd, 2021. Time-honored tradition is to end early, usually on Christmas Eve, Mr. Mizikar, is at noon? Is that correct? And this year, because Christmas falls on a Saturday, the offices are closed on the 24th. So this is a request to allow employees to leave at noon.
That is correct.
So moved.
Second.
I've been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Now we're into correspondence. Number 17, email dated November 15, 2021, from Caroline Booth of Environmental Planning Specialist Beals and Thomas regarding the Point and Hills Farm, NPC EEA number 15621, so noted. Next item, email dated November 16, 2021, from Anna Darrow, Office of State Representative Hannah Kane, regarding request for an update on 7 Boston Turnpike, Shrewsbury, so noted. Number 19, letter received November 16, 2021, from Alexander Gaget and classmates, Shrewsbury Montessori School, regarding trees being cut down in Shrewsbury. Mr. Mizikar, if we can work on a response actually together on that, so noted. Very nice letter. Item 20, letter dated, received November 18, 2021, from Gregory Gatsugiannis, Election Officer, Executive Director of the Shrewsbury Retirement Board, regarding Shrewsbury Contributory Retirement Board elected board position. So noted. And last item, letter received November 18, 2021, from Mary Claire Rigby, Lead Vegetation Strategy Specialist at National Grid Vegetation Management Strategy, regarding National Grid Yearly Operational Plan Public Notice. So noted. If there are no other questions, comments, items to be taken up, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you and have a nice Thanksgiving.